Timothy West sat at his desk at Johnson Engineering. He was the head of the engineering department. His job was to make sure that any problems with their products were promptly corrected, both in the factory and in the field. He sent Carl Johnson, the owner's nephew, to fix the problem in Penton, a 6-hour drive from there. He and two mechanics were there for 3 days and were already returning, having fixed the problem. The company produced seals in a variety of sizes, from small conceals found in households to giant 30-ton car pressure seals. When one of these machines broke down, production suffered, so fast and reliable service was a necessity. This particular machine broke down just 2 weeks ago, and Carl insisted it was fixed. But 10 days later it broke down again. Carl called saying the problem had been fixed, and they were coming back. When Sam, the owner, called Tim into his office and informed him that the machine had broken down again and the company was insisting that Tim take care of the issue personally. Tim, who didn't like conflict, agreed to go, so he called Chris to tell her he'd be out of town for a couple of days and they'd have to cancel their dinner. Chris was not happy and said she would go there anyway. She saw no reason why it would ruin her evening and slammed the phone down. Tim hung up and wondered where the loving wife he once knew had gone. Timothy West is 32 years old and graduated with honors from the university with a Master of Science in Engineering and a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science. Everything about him was average. 5'9", 150 pounds wet. He was not good at sports, but thanks to his above-average IQ of 150 points, he was an excellent student. He was quite physically fit thanks to going to the gym twice a week and was considered attractive among women. His passion was his wife Christina and restoring cars, both old and new, that the insurance company deemed unsalvageable. Christina, his wife of 9 years, had graduated from medical school at age 32 and worked at a local hospital 3 days a week. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 110 pounds, with a 36-23-37 model figure and a smile that lit up the room. Her passion was to look good. She went to the gym every day, and she spent money. Tim paid for everything: her car, maintenance, gas, rent for their big house that she wanted to have, all household bills, and also put money into a joint account that she used for everything else. They got married right after college and started life in a small apartment with the idea that they would save for a down payment on a family home. Chris insisted on separate bank accounts and never discussed her income with Tim, insisting on a single joint account but never putting anything into it. When they announced their wedding, Christina's parents pulled Tim aside to talk. Tim thought it would be a speech about not hurting his daughter, but it wasn't. It turned out that this was a warning. He was told that he was marrying a selfish woman who would take advantage of him if she had the chance. He was also warned that she could spend money like water, and her mother added that Christina was the scruffiest person she knew. Warned, he married her anyway and soon realized that her parents were right. She would empty her bank account mid-month and then complain about not having enough money. She never put anything away. She threw everything where she stood and left it. Tim constantly put away her clothes and tidied up the house. The inside of her car was like a trash can with receipts crumpled up and thrown on the floor for Tim to clean up at the end of each week. But on the other hand, there was her insatiable appetite for sex. They made love almost every night and twice on Saturday and Sunday. Tim desperately wanted children, but Chris wanted to wait, so they waited 2 years to start their family. Tim was now a supervisor at Johnson Engineering and earning a mid-5-figure salary plus bonuses. He decided to keep this money in a personal account because he knew Chris would find a way to spend it. He thought he would save it for his children's education, so he didn't tell Chris. Before Chris agreed to start a family, she insisted on moving to a bigger house. Since they had almost no savings due to her weird club membership, gym membership, new car payments, and social obligations, they decided to rent. They found a nice 3-room house with a garden in a safe residential area with a communal pool, barbecue areas, and a gym. Chris refused to change her gym because all her friends went there. As usual, Tim gave in to her demands. After all, he was a weak man who believed in the principle of turn the other cheek. He was the same at work, and his subordinates, who did not take him seriously, called him Little Tim. Everyone thought of him as a coward and henpecked. He never argued or stood his ground. Chris stopped taking the pills, and they tried to have a baby for a year without success, so Tim went to the doctor for tests. He was told that he was fine, so he wasn't the problem. Christina also went to see a doctor, but not to their family doctor, but to a family planning clinic. She returned home in tears, declaring that she was infertile. Tim consoled her as best he could, but she seemed distant. This affected their sex life, which dropped from almost every night to once a week or not at all. She also became mischievous and started arguments out of nothing. About 6 months ago, she began to humiliate Tim and embarrass him in front of his friends and family. Of course, Tim, as always, tolerated it. So it was no surprise that he agreed to go and fix the problem that Carl and his team had failed to solve again. Tim went home to pack his bag for a couple of days. When he entered the house, the first thing he noticed was the chaos. The morning breakfast was still on the table. When he went upstairs, he found clothes all over the bedroom, where Chris had decided what to wear and had simply left the discarded items wherever. He quickly cleaned up and washed the dishes after breakfast. Then I packed my bag for the trip. As he drove to his hotel, he had the opportunity to review the last few months of his marriage. It all started at a company barbecue when Chris met the new head of the company's legal department. His name was Troy Sims, a former NFL linebacker for the Ravens who was forced to retire due to a knee injury. Everyone was impressed when he was introduced to management. At 6'6" and 230 pounds, he was huge. His nickname in sports was Bear, and it was clear why. From the very beginning, he treated Tim with disdain, calling him Little Tim to his face, and standing on tiptoe, covering his eyes with his hand, pretending to look for Tim when he was standing nearby, then pretending to notice him and saying, "Oh, there you are, I didn't notice you." And everyone laughed as Tim blushed and walked away. Troy then said, "It's just a joke, little friend," and laughed. Some people at work didn't think it was funny, and the head of HR came over to talk to Tim and suggested they scold Troy for his behavior. Tim just said not to worry. It all started at a barbecue that took place on the first Saturday in June. Tim and Chris had just arrived in the parking lot, and when Tim got out of the car, he saw Troy Bear surrounded by his sycophants at the bar. When Chris came out, she pointed at Troy and asked who he was because she thought she recognized him. Tim explained who Troy was, and Chris said she would like to meet him. Tim explained that he and Troy didn't get along and that Troy was a jerk. As they walked to say hello to Mr. Johnson, the owner, Troy spotted Tim and Christina and called out, "Hey, Timmy, is that your big sister? She's too beautiful to be your wife. Ask her if she ever wants to marry a real man." There was a stunned silence, and Troy realized that he had crossed the line and shouted, "Just kidding, no offense, little friend." All his friends laughed, but what really made Tim angry was that Chris laughed too. He felt his face heat up as he walked up to his boss and introduced himself to Chris. Samuel said to ignore Troy and that he would talk to him later. Samuel's wife, May, apologized for Troy and her husband's lack of empathy and said that Troy was a typical jock and scoundrel. Tim didn't want to go get drinks because Troy and his hangers-on were positioned next to the bar and would probably humiliate him. Luckily, Chad Foster, the head of human resources, saw the incident and brought them drinks. He stayed and chatted for a while, praising Tim's contributions to the company's success. Tim asked Chris if she wanted anything to eat and went to the roast pork trailer. The line was long, so it took a while to get food. He looked around where he left Chris, but she was nowhere to be found. He assumed she had gone to the toilet, but after a while she did not return, and he began to worry. May approached him and asked what the problem was. When he explained his concerns about Chris, one of the women at their table said she saw her leave with Troy and pointed in the direction. Tim, fearing the worst, hurried after them, followed by May. They walked around the bushes and saw them standing close to each other, talking in low voices. When Chris saw him, she stuttered and took a couple of steps back to a more respectful distance. "Hey, honey, Troy was just showing me the view of the lake. Isn't it wonderful?" Yeah, very romantic, I'm sure, Tim said. What are you implying? We didn't do anything wrong, Chris shouted. Yeah, Timmy, don't be nervous. We were just having fun, no big deal, Troy said with a grin. We're leaving now, Tim said and took Chris's hand. She pulled her hand away and said, Stop acting like a spoiled schoolboy, I'm staying. Well, I'm leaving. I'm sure you can find someone to give you a ride home. And he went to the car. May stood and watched the whole scene and gave Chris a very disapproving look and said, If you value your marriage, you better catch up with him and apologize. Chris gave her an angry look and left to catch up with her husband. May looked at the grinning Troy and said, You can wipe that grin off your face if you want to keep your job and stop harassing other people's wives. The barbecue is over for you, go home. Troy knew better than to argue with May, since his job really depended on her word, since she owned all the money. Chris caught up with Tim when he got to the car, but instead of opening the door for her, he walked around to the driver's side and got into the car. Tim always opened the door for her, and she realized how seriously angry he was. When they got home, as soon as they walked through the door, she started attacking him. What the hell was that? He was just friendly. I told you when we arrived that we hated each other, and when he tried to provoke me in front of everyone, you giggled along with the others. How do you think I felt seeing my own wife laughing at me? Then, while I was getting us food, he took you behind the bushes. We didn't do anything wrong, we were just talking. Well, you were talking very quietly and standing too close, as you well know, judging by the guilty look on your face when you moved away. And it doesn't matter whether you did something or not, it looked like you did something, including my boss's wife. He's probably bragging to his hangers-on about how he kissed you in front of me. I told you he was a creep, but you didn't listen. All you saw was a sports star, and you couldn't wait to take your panties off. Let me tell you, I don't want you to see him again, or we will be reconsidering our relationship. And Tim went into his office and closed the door. Christina was left standing stunned. Tim had never spoken to her like that before, and always left his office door open. Over the next week, the atmosphere in the house was cold, and they spoke to each other only when necessary. Then one evening, Chris sat next to Tim and apologized for her behavior and said she would make it up to him before leading him into the bedroom. Their lovemaking was strained at first, but soon gained momentum, and they fell asleep in each other's arms. Tim woke up first and went to prepare breakfast. While preparing breakfast, he thought about the previous night. Although the sex was good, he felt something was missing. He didn't feel the special connection they had before. He went to work, still wondering what he was missing. He decided to surprise Chris and invite her to dinner. He told his assistant Tina, a matron who treated him like a mother, that he would be back late from lunch and left. When he got to the hospital, he went to her department and asked to call her on the phone. The nurse at the counter told him that she had already left for lunch with her husband. Tim asked her to describe the man since he was her husband, but he thought he already knew the answer. She described his worst nightmare. It was Troy, that bastard, as he thought of him. He thought he knew where they might be and went there to see if he was right. As he pulled up to the diner, he saw them through the window, sitting across from each other in a booth, talking like two old friends. He took a couple of pictures with his phone. He was glad to note that they weren't holding hands or sitting next to each other, so he just walked away. That evening, when he returned home from work after changing, he asked her how her day had been. Oh, the usual, hospital stuff. Nothing special happened. I was going to surprise you and invite you to dinner, but I got called away. Sorry about that. It's okay, I just went to lunch with a couple of friends. Call me next time. The rest of the evening passed as usual, without sex or even a goodnight kiss. The next day I waited for her at the diner, and, as expected, she arrived with Troy. I followed them back to the hospital and was shocked when she stood on her tiptoes to kiss Troy on the cheek goodbye. I took a couple of good pictures with my phone. That night after dinner, I asked her what she did today and received the usual answer. When I asked about lunch, she looked guilty and told the same story about having lunch with her friends. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "This is the second time you have deceived me in 2 days. What other lies have you lied to me about?" What are you talking about? I never lied to you. This is 3 times. Do you want to do it 4 times? I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't appreciate being called a liar. I'm going to bed. You can sleep on the sofa. Good night. Sit the hell down, you liar. I saw you with Troy yesterday and today. I'm sorry, it was nothing. We were just having lunch. It's just lunch. And you didn't hold hands or kiss? No, of course not. So who are these two holding hands walking back into the hospital, and who is this one kissing Troy at the entrance? As I threw the photos across the table towards her, she looked at the photographs and burst into tears. Nothing happened. I swear it was just a kiss between friends. It wasn't romantic in any way. Now you know why I warned you about Troy. He is trying to put a wedge between us, and it seems to be working. Why are you even dating him? He just came in to apologize about the barbecue and say how sorry he was if it caused an argument. He was just being friendly. What about the second time? He said he was just passing through and thought we could have lunch together, so I agreed. I'm sorry that I lied to you, but I knew that you would take it with hostility and get angry like last time. You scared me. I've never seen you so angry. You're always so calm. That's because my wife has never left with another man before. Now I'm not asking. I'm telling you not to date Troy anymore, or there will be problems. You can't tell me who to be friends with. That's my business. You don't own me. I'll date whoever I want. And she went to bed, locking the door. The next morning was her day off. I usually got up, prepared breakfast, and brought it to her on a tray. This time I took a shower in the guest bathroom, grabbed some clean clothes from the ironing pile, and went to work. I stopped at Wendy's for breakfast on the way. When I arrived at work, I saw Troy standing at the coffee machine with a couple of his hangers-on. As I walked by, he grinned and said, "How about lunch, Timmy? My usual company is busy today. Would you like to join?" And they all laughed. One even raised 2 fingers on the sides of his head like horns, and they laughed even louder. As I walked into my office, I heard Troy say to the person who made the antlers, "Not yet, but soon." I was furious that Chris had put me in this position, so I called her and told her what happened. She just laughed and said it was just them having fun and that I shouldn't take it seriously. I was sitting in the office trying to figure out what to do and decided to make an effort to win my wife back from this creep. So I made a reservation at her favorite restaurant for tonight. I called her and told her to be ready by 8. That day led to me eventually going out to fix a broken car that Carl Johnson should have already fixed. I wondered who Christina would take to the restaurant with her, so I called a friend from my school days, Harry Price. He was a nerd like me, only he got a master's in computer science and a bachelor's in electronics. He now owned a small security company, doing mostly background checks for the government. He was happy to hear from me, as we had kept in touch over the years, so my call wasn't a complete surprise. When I told him about my concerns, he immediately went into work mode. "Okay, I know what she looks like, but can you describe it?" I gave a good description, but when I said his name, he said he could get his photo from the internet. I said I didn't want the information until I returned from the trip because I didn't want to be distracted. He said he understood and would wait for my call. Just before dinner, when I was about 20 miles out of town on the freeway, a semi-trailer blew a tire, crossed the median, and hit my car, sending it off the road into a ditch, where it flipped over and ended up upside down. I heard my scattered spirit hovering over the operating table. Doctors and nurses huddled around the table, trying to revive the patient. They had already used the defibrillator twice, and this was their last attempt. "Clear the place." Bang, bang. Once again, "Clear the place." Bang, bang. There's no reaction. I'm recording the time. As he said it, an entity unlike mine left the body, only this one was almost white, while mine was almost black. As we got closer, I felt a pull, and we merged into one, dark gray in color. We then seemed to be pulled back into the body on the table, and the last thing I heard Gunny say was, "I don't believe we have a pulse." I lay listening to voices that seemed very far away. "It's a miracle. He was dead. There was no pulse, and nothing showed on the monitor." "Well, he's alive now and looks good, but I'm not sure he'll be able to walk again. I went back to sleep. I could see a bright light through my eyelids and tried to open my eyes, but they seemed stuck together. He seems to be waking up. The eyelids were parted. A bright light hit the eyes. Mr. West, can you hear me? Cough, cough. Nurse, bring some ice. Cold, wet feeling on the lips. Pleasant. Where am I? You are in the hospital, Mr. West. Do you remember what happened? I was responding to a call, and I remember seeing the truck hit the barrier and then nothing. Is my wife here? Yes, she was here while this was happening. She just went out to get coffee. She'll be back soon. Why can't I feel my legs and can't move my arms? What's wrong with me? I won't lie to you, Mr. West. Your injuries are serious and your back is broken, so don't try to move or you could cause more damage. At that moment, the door opened and Chris came in. Seeing that I was awake, she put down her coffee and rushed towards me. I could not turn my head as it was fixed in some kind of structure. She took my hand and kissed me tenderly on the lips. I felt moisture on my face and realized that she was crying. Oh dear, thank God you're alive. I was so worried. You were in a coma for 3 days, and they weren't sure if you would even wake up. I must have fallen asleep again because when I opened my eyes, I was alone. I pressed the call for a nurse, who came very quickly. Has my wife gone home? Yes, Mr. West, but that was yesterday. She will come again later. Would you like something to eat? No, but I'm very thirsty. The nurse brought me a glass with a straw. I never thought that water could taste so good, so I closed my eyes and fell asleep again. Chris came to see me every day and stayed until the nurses kicked her out. During this time, our company lawyer came to me and informed me that the semi-trailer that collided with me was determined to be defective based on the results of the accident investigation. He said I needed to hire a lawyer and sue for damages. He recommended a friend and said he would contact me. Harry Price, having heard about my accident, came to see me. He told me that Chris spent the evening of my misfortune with Troy and gave me photos of them together. His man followed them to the nightclub, and he had more photos of them dancing. There was nothing inappropriate there except that she was at a party with another man without her husband's knowledge. His man said Troy then took her home and warned me that I wouldn't like the next photo. She didn't invite him inside, but the kiss she gave him certainly wouldn't pass the husband test. I asked him to continue observing, and he said that he had not stopped. He then told me that she had lunch with Troy every day since my accident and went dancing with him twice more. She never invited him inside, but the kisses became longer and longer. I gave him the keys to the house and asked him to install cameras in the house. He said it was not a problem, so I asked him to write a letter to the guards at the entrance to the complex with permission to enter our house. The letter also stated that my wife should not be informed of their entry. I signed it and gave it to Harry. I knew that the security guards would not tell my wife since I was the only tenant under the contract. That afternoon, a man came into my room and introduced himself as George Fate, a lawyer who had been recommended to me. We talked for over an hour, and it was decided to file a lawsuit for $10 million. He said he'd be lucky if we got half that amount, but since it was their fault and I'd probably never walk again, he was confident. I signed a contract for the provision of services, and he left. That night, I awaited Chris's visit, knowing that her reaction would determine our marriage. Chris entered my room promptly at 6 p.m., the start of visiting hours. We talked a little about my condition, and then I brought up the elephant in the room. Chris, the night of my accident, you said you were going to go out anyway, right? No, honey, I didn't want to go anywhere. And remember, you said that you would date whoever you wanted, and it was none of your business. She began to get nervous, fidgeting with her hands and not looking me in the eyes. Well, remember? Of course, honey, I'm sorry about that. I was just angry. I didn't mean it. So you haven't seen Troy since then? No, of course not. I wouldn't go against your wishes. You're my husband. Have you ever heard the expression, 3 strikes and you're out? It's from baseball. If a batter misses 3 times, he is automatically out. Of course, but what does this have to do with our situation? You've already lied to me twice tonight, and if you lie to me again, our marriage may not survive." She became defensive and almost screamed, "I have never lied to you. What gives you the right to call me a liar?" I pulled out from under the blanket the envelope containing the photographs Harry had given me. "First lie, you said you didn't go out that night," and I handed her a photo of her dinner with Troy. She looked at the photo and screamed, covering her mouth with her hand. Then I showed her a photo of her dancing with Troy, and she started crying. "Second lie, you said you haven't seen Troy, and here you are having lunch with him every day since my accident. Not only that, but you also danced with him twice more. Can you explain that?" "I'm really sorry, and I swear nothing happened. We were just talking. He's not what you think he is. When the accident happened, he came to see how I was, and we went to lunch. I felt better when I had someone to talk to. He was so understanding and sympathetic. Yes, we danced, but he acted like a gentleman and didn't try to do anything. I didn't mention it because I knew how you felt about him, but he's actually a very nice person." Tears rolled down her face. "Think very carefully before you answer this question. Your answer may depend on our marriage. Have you ever kissed him?" I saw her thinking. How much does he know? He knew everything else. Perhaps if I prevaricate, I would be able to avoid answering. "Yes, I kissed him once on the cheek, just to thank him for his support, but it didn't mean anything. I only love you. 3 strikes, you're out." And I gave her pictures of her kissing Troy on the lips in 3 different places. Tears were now flowing freely, and she began to sob. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. It just came so naturally, and I was drinking, so I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm sorry. It won't happen again, I promise." I can't say how damaging this is to our marriage, but at the very least, we need counseling to try to work it out. Luckily, it didn't go further than a kiss. If you had invited him to our home or gone to see him, we would have gotten divorced. If that's what you want, say it now, and we can finish this. I don't want a divorce, I love you. And I didn't want a disrespectful wife, but that's what I got. Tim, I'm sorry, I'll try to improve if you give me a chance. Chris, I don't want a divorce either, but I can't live in a marriage based on lies. This is your last chance. If you see him again, we're done. Do you understand what I'm saying? I promise. It was at this moment that the signal sounded, signaling the end of visiting hours. Chris came up to me, kissed me, and whispered, "I promise." Then she left. I was physically and emotionally exhausted and immediately fell asleep. The next day Harry came, and I could see from his face that he was bringing bad news. He sat down in a chair and looked at me. "Tim, I'm so sorry, but I have bad news. Troy came to your house, and he stayed the night." My heart broke right then, and I started sobbing. Harry came up to me and put his hand on my shoulder. "Tim, it wasn't entirely her fault. He put something in her drink. The video clearly shows him putting something in her drink." "Harry, it doesn't matter what he did. She promised me she wouldn't see him again. She put herself in a position to be subjected to this, so it's her fault. Do you have a video of her cheating?" "Yes, do you want to watch it? It is unpleasant." "Not yet, but you can make me a few copies, and today is one of her work days, so she won't be home until 6, so I want you to do something for me." I gave him a list of things I wanted him to do, and he said he could get it done before she got home. My phone was damaged in an accident, so I asked Harry to buy me a new one and transfer all the data to it. I also asked him to buy me a pay-as-you-go SIM card. I then took his number and called the lawyer handling my case and asked him to recommend a good divorce lawyer. He said he would contact me. Harry left to run my errands, and I cried like a baby over the loss of my wife and marriage. Christina. When I left the hospital, I felt terrible. I had hurt my husband and broken our marriage. I went home, determined to fix everything. I called Troy and told him I couldn't see him anymore because Tim found out and threatened to divorce him. He insisted on meeting to discuss it, and I gave in. Maybe deep down I still wanted to see him. When he knocked on the door, I opened it, and he came right in. When I closed the door and turned around, he hugged me and kissed me passionately. At first I tried to push him away, but then I melted in his arms. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't resist. We kissed for a long time, then he let me go and said that he had to see me because he was in love with me. It was a complete surprise, and I sat up in shock. Troy went to the kitchen and returned with a couple glasses of wine. I needed to go to the bathroom and collect my thoughts. I should have gently rejected Troy. I loved my husband, not him. We sat and drank wine, and Troy explained that he fell in love with me at first sight at the barbecue. I tried to push him away, but my resistance weakened as I saw how he was suffering. I wanted to take a sip of wine and noticed that my wine was finished, so I poured more into both glasses. Troy was now crying and telling me how much he loved me, so I sat next to him and hugged him. A few minutes later, he looked at me, leaned in for a kiss, and even though I knew I shouldn't, I kissed him back. The kiss grew into caresses, then into passionate caresses. My head was spinning, and I was hornier than ever. We quickly undressed and lay down on the bed. Some time later, we fell asleep, exhausted. In the morning, I woke up and realized what I had done, but strangely, I was not as upset as I expected. In fact, I wanted more. We had sex twice more in the morning, but we had work, so we separated. I spent the entire day remembering having sex with Troy and was horny for most of the day. I wondered how I would be able to look Tim in the eyes in the evening, but I pushed those thoughts away. I called Troy to meet him for lunch, but he said he had a meeting and would see me that evening, so I was left alone. When I got home, the first thing I noticed was that Tim's truck was missing, and when I looked in the garage, the Mercedes SLK Tim was working on was missing. I shuddered and ran into the house. Wherever she was, something was missing. Tim's favorite chair was missing from the living room. The door to the office was open, and Tim's desk and chair, as well as his computer, were gone. And all his photographs on the wall disappeared, except for the ones where they were broken on the floor. The safe was open and empty, as was the gun safe. I went upstairs and went into our bedroom, where I saw dirty sheets and remembered last night. I opened the cabinets and drawers, and all of Tim's things were gone, as if he had never lived here. I quickly changed my clothes and went to the hospital, but when I got to the floor where Tim's room was, a nurse stopped me and said that Tim had given instructions not to let me in and handed me an envelope. I tried to walk past, but she pushed me away, saying that if I didn't leave, she would call security. I left. Sitting in the car, I opened the envelope. I knew what was inside. There were photos of me letting Troy into the house and a series of photos of me giving myself to Troy in both the living room and bedroom. There was a short note. "You have been warned." I burst into tears. I was to blame for everything that happened, and now it was time to pay the bills. 3 days later, I was standing at the information desk, waiting for some paperwork, when a woman in a conservative business suit approached me and asked, "Are you Mrs. Christine West?" I replied, "Yes," and she handed me a manila envelope saying, "Served to you," took a photo of me with her phone, and left. I stood there, trembling, trying to open the envelope. I opened it, and some forms and photos fell out. My friends and colleagues came to me to find out what happened. As they bent down to collect them, they couldn't help but see the pictures of me cheating with Troy. They threw them on the counter, gave me dirty looks, and left. My actions will be known throughout the hospital by the end of the shift. I looked at the divorce papers filed for adultery and noticed that there was a restraining order attached to them, prohibiting me from coming within 200 yards of Tim or his place of residence or work. I thought it couldn't get any worse, but when I arrived home, there was a letter waiting for me saying that I had a week to move out of the apartment, since Tim had canceled the lease. As I sat bemoaning my fate, the phone rang. It was Troy, who said that he, too, was held accountable at work for destroying someone else's family and demanded to know where Tim was. I said Tim was still in the hospital, but they wouldn't let him in. When I asked if he was free for lunch tomorrow, he made excuses and refused. When I asked if he would come this evening, he said he was busy and hung up. I sat there looking at the phone and thought that Tim was right. Troy had really put a wedge between us, and now I was chasing Troy for some affection. I sat and cried over the loss of my husband and lover. My problems weren't over yet. On the way to work, I tried to pay for gas with my joint card as usual and was refused. I quickly tried my personal credit card, which was accepted. I needed to sort this out. I tried to call Tim and received the answer. This number is not in service. I'll email Tim when I get home. The day dragged on slowly, and when the shift ended, I was relieved. Not only because I hadn't seen my lover all day, but also because my friends and colleagues were avoiding me. On my day off, I contacted the bank to find out that Tim had taken half of our savings and canceled my card. I agreed to issue a new card the next day. My next call was to the rental agency, where after some negotiations they allowed me to transfer the lease into my name, but at a higher rate. I also had to negotiate to restore utilities because Tim had shut them off. I'll have to cut costs. Over the next few weeks, I saw Troy once or twice a week, but all the tenderness disappeared and was replaced by demandingness and sometimes cruelty. I can't say I was shocked. The truth is I loved the way he treated me like a bitch. While Tim was gentle and loving, always thinking of me first. Troy was just using me for his pleasure. I was like a rag doll in his hands. He just put me where he wanted me and had me mercilessly. I realized that he is a real alpha male, and Tim will never be able to compete with him. After 3 months, I still haven't received a single message from Tim, only from his lawyer. I, of course, hired my own lawyer, and amazingly, Troy helped me with the expenses. Tim. Harry came back to me and said that he had done everything and everything was stored in a warehouse on the other side of town. He also gave me a new phone with a new SIM card. I sent my new number to everyone I could trust so they wouldn't give it to Chris. I wasn't expecting any visitors this evening, so I was pleasantly surprised when May, my boss's wife, walked in. Hi, Tim. How are you? Thank you for coming. I would feel better. Listen, Tim, I know you've hired a lawyer to take on your lawsuit against the trucking company, and you can count on our full support. However, you must understand that you also have a claim against us since you were on a business trip at the time of the accident. Now you get your full salary and your job is secure. If your lawyer formally files a claim against us, we will offer him a significant settlement. But he has to file a claim so we can go to our insurance company. This will not affect your work in any way, but we need to follow the procedure. I really appreciate you caring so much about me, and I'll mention it to my lawyer the next time I see him. It was at that moment that he entered, accompanied by a short, plump woman of about 55, whom he introduced as Carol Cobb. I saw May's eyes widen, and she looked at me questioningly. Sorry, I need to introduce myself. Mrs. Johnson, this is my attorney handling my case, George Fate, and hopefully my divorce attorney, Carol Cobb. May looked at me and raised her eyebrows in question. Sorry, May, I was going to tell you. I'm going to divorce my wife because of her infidelity. She just looked at me and said, Who? Troy Sims, of course. May nodded her head and sat down, thereby showing that she would not go anywhere. George looked at me, and I motioned for him to continue. He went out into the hallway and brought 2 more chairs, which he and Carol sat on. George began talking about how the lawsuit was going, and when he finished, he apologized and left. Carol asked me if I had any evidence of Chris cheating. I said I had pictures and videos. She asked if they were here. I said I had some pictures, but I was still waiting for the video. She asked to see the photographs, and I gave them to her. As she was looking through them, May came and stood behind her, and I heard a sharp intake of breath. Then I was surprised to hear May exclaim, This scoundrel, a vile piece of shit, seducing a man's wife while he's in the hospital, and she's no better. I'll fire his ass first thing tomorrow, and then I get her fired too. I donate a ton of money to the hospital where she works. It's time for payback. Damn, she was furious. Carol said, Can you wait a little, please? If she remains unemployed, Tim's alimony payments will be much higher. But if she works and earns enough to support herself, he might not have to pay at all. And if he sues Mr. Sims for breaking up family ties and he doesn't work, the suit will be dismissed. Either way, it may not lead to anything, but at the very least, it will cause him embarrassment. Once the divorce is finalized, you can fire him and arrange for her to be fired. May agreed to hold off for now. Then she said she had to go, kissed my forehead and left. Carol asked me a few more questions and asked if I could provide her with proof of Chris's income and our financial situation. She then gave me some tips on how to protect my finances. I asked if I could get a restraining order against her, and she agreed. Then she wanted to know when to file her divorce suit. I said as soon as possible, but in her workplace. Then I explained what I had done and was going to do, and she said it was all legal since the lease was in my name only and left me in my misery. The next day, I called the rental agent to cancel the lease immediately. I also asked if he had ground floor apartments within a 5-mile radius. He said he had what I needed, also in a gated community just 2 miles from my current home. He wanted to know why I was leaving, so I told him the condensed version, and he agreed to give Chris a notice of eviction the next day. I paid the deposit by card and the first month of rent. Next on my to-do list was sorting out my finances. I called the bank to pay off the credit cards and close the joint account, but they said it had to be done in person. So I just paid off the cards and canceled them with the credit card company. Then I opened a new line of credit just for myself. I called Carol and told her that I couldn't close the joint account, so I just zeroed it out, leaving $1. That day, the surgeon came to see me, and after an X-ray and scan, he said that the swelling had subsided, and now it was possible to operate. The operation was scheduled for the following Monday. When Tim woke up on Tuesday, he was surprised to see May sitting in a chair reading a magazine. He tried to speak, but all he could manage was a wheeze. May heard him wheezing and called a nurse, who gave him ice cubes to suck. After sucking on a few pieces of ice, he asked May what she was doing there. She replied that since he had no one, she decided to play the role of mother. When he tried to laugh, his back hurt so much that he almost lost consciousness. He felt something in his legs, but could not move them yet. He looked down at his body, which was encased in a cast from neck to hips. He lay on a special bed that tilted so he could eat and swallow regular food rather than the baby food he had been eating before. He thanked May for being there and cried when he realized he had no one else. He fell asleep again and had a dream that he was in the desert in a firefight and was returning home to his cheating wife. This woke him up, sweaty and confused. The nurse came in as his monitor showed a sharp spike in blood pressure. Seeing that he had woken up, she asked if he was all right. Yeah, just a bad dream. Well, since you woke up, the doctor will want to see you. I'll call him now. She left the room, and a few minutes later the doctor entered. Well, Mr. West, the surgery went better than expected. When I opened you up, your spine was already in alignment, and there was minimal swelling of the spinal cord. Honestly, I've never seen anything like this before. I just put a plate in place to help stabilize your back while it heals. If everything goes as well as this, there's no reason why you couldn't make a full recovery. To help you with this, I suggest you go to one of our rehabilitation centers. How do you feel about this? Sounds good. When can I go there? You can go tomorrow if you want. I'll schedule an ambulance. The next day, I was taken to a small clinic 50 miles away for rehabilitation, which included learning to walk again. When my cast came off, I started doing a lot of exercises to stretch my ligaments. The doctor who performed my operation came to look at me. Mr. Kaz West, you are a real mystery. When they brought you, you weighed 57 kg. After your forced inactivity, you should have lost weight and muscle mass. Instead, you now weigh 70 kg with well-defined muscles. This goes against all the rules of recovery. In fact, you have the body I would expect to see on a soldier. There's one more thing I can't explain. You get a scar from your left eye to your mouth. Have you ever been injured in this place? No, maybe this is the result of an accident. Your medical records don't show any injuries in that area, so probably not. However, we will keep an eye on this. The good news is that you're healing much faster than we expected, so I'm going to remove your stabilizing plate tomorrow, and you can get out of here in 2 weeks. While all this was going on, Harry kept me posted on Chris's movements. When I kicked her out of the hospital, she went straight home and cried a lot. She managed to keep the lease of the house in her name only, so she was still living at our old address. He also said that Troy visited her often and often stayed overnight, so Harry had plenty of video evidence for my upcoming divorce. But he said any video evidence taken after she took out the lease in her name would be inadmissible in court. He also told me that she spent several nights at his house. I asked him to track Troy, and he said he could, but it would be illegal, and we could be prosecuted if we were caught. I said that I only needed it for information, and no one else would know. He agreed to try to gain access and install recording devices, and said he would contact me later. I thanked him for moving all my stuff to my new apartment and told him I owed him a beer. After my quick recovery, I finally left the clinic and Harry picked me up and took me to my apartment, which I had never seen. We parked next to my truck in a secure underground parking lot and walked up to my new apartment. As we entered, I was greeted by a loud scream of surprise. Some of my colleagues were waiting for me there, led by May, who rushed into my arms and whispered, "Welcome home." There were also a few faces there that I didn't recognize, and I later learned that they were the welcome committee from our apartment complex. I especially liked the red-haired girl and decided I wanted to get to know her better. May and Harry furnished the apartment together. I had everything I needed. Even the computer was already set up, and the new TV was hanging on the wall. I was literally amazed and started crying with joy, hugging everyone. I thought I was left alone, but I was wrong. I had friends. The next day, I made an appointment with my claims lawyer in the afternoon. He told me that the shipping company had offered $3 million, but he said he could get at least $5 million if I waited, and I agreed. He also said May contacted him after he filed a lawsuit against the Johnsons, and after a short negotiation, they agreed to pay compensation in the amount of $13 million and keep me as chief engineer. He said he accepted their offer on my behalf, and the check was deposited into my separate account, separate from my wife's. As I was driving around a new area, enjoying the joy of driving and experiencing new surroundings, I noticed a gym and suddenly wanted to sign up there. I parked and walked into a gym called Sam's Mixed Martial Arts Gym and Training Center. As soon as I walked in, my nostrils were filled with the smells of sweat, liniment, and leather. It was an old-fashioned gym with free weights, a boxing ring, and various leather punching bags. There was also a large mat area for sparring. As I stood there, a man came out of the sparring area and approached me. "Can I help you?" Yes, I'm thinking about joining the gym to build some muscle. I've been sick recently and need to get back into shape." "Okay, we can definitely help with this. Come into the office and we'll discuss everything." This was the beginning of my acquaintance with MMA. I ran, lifted weights, swam, and studied various forms of martial arts for the next 3 months. By the end of this period, I weighed 82 kg, all muscle, and could confidently hold my own in the ring. I had a plan and told Sam about it, who thought it would be fun to implement and asked how he could help. We discussed the details over beer, and at some point he said, "Okay, Tim, now that we're friends, tell me the truth. You're a former Special Forces soldier, aren't you?" "Sam, I swear on my mother's grave, I never served. In fact, before coming to your hall, I never took part in a fight." "Well, Tim, at first glance, it was clear that you were straight. Your skill level is more like someone who has been training all their life. All I can say is that you must have been quite the beast in your past life." Going back to when I first moved, I joined a gym, so instead of driving back and forth, I ran there and back as part of my training program. One evening, as I was trying to go into my apartment, I noticed a little girl, about 8 or 9 years old, sitting at the door of the apartment at the end of the hallway. I remembered the red-haired girl at my party and suggested that this might be her apartment. I approached her and asked if she was okay as she seemed scared. She replied that she had returned from school, but her mother was not at home as usual. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't just leave her there, and it wouldn't be right to invite her to my apartment to wait alone. I didn't really know many people in the building other than the security guard on duty. I knocked on several doors, but no one answered. I asked her if she had a phone number to call my mom, and she said she had already tried that and left a message and text. I invited her to come with me to the guard downstairs, and she agreed. When I explained the problem to the security guard, he said that they have a procedure for such cases and called the police. When they arrived, we all went to my apartment to talk. And that's how I found out her name was Amanda, and her mom's name was Lindy. While we were talking, I gave her milk and cookies, and she seemed calmer. As we talked, she told me that she and her mother lived alone, but her mother was always at home when she returned from school. The police officer tried to call Social Security to come and pick her up, but they said there wouldn't be an employee available for several hours. Then they asked to talk to Amanda, asked her if she had a nanny and where she lived, if she knew her number. The nanny lived on the next floor, so we went to see her. She agreed to look after Amanda until we could find her mother. I took the cop back to my apartment, and he started checking Lindy's place of work. She was an accountant for a local engineering company who said she left home at her usual time to return to her daughter. The policeman asked them to check if her car was still in the parking lot, and they said it wasn't. They gave him the make and model, but didn't know the registration number. He quickly figured it out and sent out a wanted message based on the license plate number. He then began calling hospitals and learned that a woman matching Lindy's description had been found unconscious in an alley. The officer who arrived on the scene said he believed it was a robbery gone wrong, and there was no sign of her belongings, and the car was also missing. We went up to the nanny and explained what had happened, and she agreed to look after Amanda for the night. The officer said he was going to the hospital, and I asked if I could accompany him, but first I needed to change clothes. He looked a little annoyed at first, but still agreed. We arrived at the hospital and were directed to her room. I saw that it was a ward with 6 beds. I asked why she didn't have a private room, and they said they didn't know if she had insurance, so they put her in a shared room. I approached the counter and demanded to see the administrator. When she arrived, I told her I wanted her to be moved to a private room with full services and her own nurse, and I would sign all the necessary paperwork and act as guarantor. Their attitude immediately improved and things started moving. The doctor came over to us, now that we were in a private room, and explained that she had suffered a blow to the head and might not wake up for hours or even days. The officer made some notes and said he was leaving and asked if I wanted a ride. I said I would stay a little, and he left. I went to the gift shop and bought a couple of magazines and then settled into a not very comfortable chair for the night. I was still there the next morning when the doctor came to check her charts. He lifted her eyelids and pointed a flashlight into her eyes to check the reaction of her pupils. As he walked away, she groaned, and he quickly returned to her side and checked her vital signs. At this time, she opened her eyes. "Where am I?" "You're in the hospital. Do you remember what happened to you?" "Yes, 2 men pulled me out of the car. One of them hit me, and I don't remember anything after that." "Well, you are in good hands. We will inform the police that you have regained consciousness. Expect a visit." "I can't stay here. My daughter will be horrified." I woke up. "She's fine. The nanny is looking after her." "Who are you? I know you from somewhere." "You were one of those who welcomed me to my apartment. I'm your neighbor, remember?" "But how are you?" "SHH, just rest. I'll bring Amanda tonight. Do you need to bring anything?" She gave me the list, and I left. When I got back to my apartment, I showered and changed, then went to get the nanny and picked up Amanda, telling her that her mom was fine but in the hospital. Amanda had 1,000 questions, but I had few answers. The nanny gave me a spare key to Lindy's apartment, so we went in there and Amanda packed according to the list her mother had given her. Amanda took the day off from school due to a family emergency, so there was no problem. Amanda insisted on changing, so I went back to my apartment and waited. When she came to pick me up, she looked cute in the way only girls can, even wearing her hair in a ponytail like her mother liked. It was still too early for a hospital visit, so we went to McDonald's for dinner, which earned me a lot of points from Amanda. After dinner, we grabbed milkshakes and went to the park to feed the ducks and talk. It turned out that Lindy was divorced and her husband moved abroad and never contacted her or Amanda again or paid child support. I learned all this from a 9-year-old girl while we fed the ducks and drank cocktails. I then decided never to underestimate small children. When we arrived at the hospital, Lindy was sitting reading one of the magazines I had bought. When she saw Amanda, her face lit up and they hugged for a full minute. She told Amanda that she had an accident but was recovering. The Lindys remained in hospital for a week as the brain swelling slowly subsided. I picked her up on Friday morning and took her home. She still had to rest for at least another 2 weeks. She refused to go to bed, so I insisted she rest on the couch. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, but when I returned, she was already sleeping peacefully. Amanda was due home in about 2 hours, so I started preparing dinner for them. Amanda burst in shouting, "I'm home," before realizing her mother was asleep. Lindy still didn't wake up, so Amanda came over and hugged me. There is something special about a child's hug, and I cried as I hugged her back. She looked at me and said, "Thank you for taking care of us. I really love you, and I think my mom does too." I finished dinner with mac and cheese and salad and ice cream for dessert. Amanda woke Lindy up with a kiss and said, "Dinner is ready." Lindy looked at me and smiled. "Thank you, you didn't have to do all that, but I'm very grateful." I served dinner on 2 plates and was about to leave, but they insisted that I join them. After dinner, I helped Amanda with her homework, and after watching her favorite movie, it was time for her to go to bed. Lindy started to get up, but Amanda said she wanted me to put her to bed and read her a story. I looked at Lindy and she nodded in agreement, so I told Amanda to put on her pajamas and call me when she was ready. I went into her room and carefully left the door open. She gave me her favorite book, and I turned to the marked page and started reading. After about 10 minutes, her eyes closed and she fell asleep. I inserted a bookmark and put the book on the shelf. Before I left, I did something I never thought I'd do. I leaned down and kissed her on the forehead. As I was about to leave, she whispered in her sleep, "I love you, Tim." I stopped, shocked and unsure what to do next. I was sure she was asleep, so she probably didn't even know she said it. When I sat down across from Lindy, she asked what happened. But when I explained what happened, she laughed and said that Amanda had already told her how she felt. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, not understanding what had just happened. It was getting late, so I cleaned up dinner and was about to leave. But when I opened the door, Lindy was standing next to me. As I looked at her, she leaned over and kissed me softly on the lips. "Fisto say thank you for everything you've done. We really appreciate it." I went into my apartment and closed the door behind me, still feeling her lips on mine. Over the next few weeks, we grew closer and had dinner together many times. Sometimes them at home, and sometimes I invited them to dinner. Whenever it was at their apartment, I would read Amanda a story until she fell asleep. Then Lindy and I would sit and talk until it was time for me to leave. During one of our conversations, I told Lindy my sad story, at the end of which tears came to my eyes. I admitted that I knew her story and that Amanda had spilled the beans while feeding the ducks. Lindy thought it was funny and agreed with me to never underestimate a small child. We kind of started dating, but always with Amanda. We went to Disneyland in Florida for a long weekend, in separate rooms, of course. Amanda was starting to feel like the daughter I never had, and Lindy and I were very close, but I was afraid to take the next step and ruin everything. One morning, there was a knock on my door and Lindy and Amanda were standing there. Lindy asked me to come over for dinner tonight because she wanted to discuss something with me. I had a bad feeling about this and looked at Amanda, who just giggled. That evening, I went to Lindy's and knocked, and she told me to come in. She stood there in her dressing gown, showed me to a seat, and sat down opposite me. And then I heard these terrible words: "We need to talk." I felt sick inside and wanted to leave. When I went to get up, she asked where I thought I was going. I admitted that I thought she wanted to end our friendship. "No, I want to know why you didn't even try to kiss me. I know you don't like men, is that me?" "God, no, you're everything I could ever want. You're perfect. I just didn't want to push you away." "Well, thank God, now come here." She stood up and beckoned me towards her, at the same time throwing off her dressing gown, under which she was naked. I just stood there and looked at the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She came up to me, kissed me sensually, and stuck her tongue into my mouth. We held our lips in a kiss. It seemed forever. She led me into the bedroom. In the morning, I woke up to the smell of frying bacon, so I got up, took a shower, and went to the kitchen in only my boxers. Lindy stood preparing breakfast in only her robe. We looked at each other. She blushed and looked down in shame. I walked up to her and hugged her. "Are you sorry about what happened last night?" "No, and you?" "Never. It was the best night of my life, and you are the most wonderful woman in the world." We ate breakfast and then went to pick up Amanda. It was a Saturday, so no school or work. We took Amanda to the cinema to see the latest Frozen movie. Afterwards, we went to McDonald's for lunch. We were sitting there drinking milkshakes when Amanda asked me in a small voice, "So will you be my new daddy?" Lindy and I nearly choked on our cocktails, but I still responded, "Would you like that?" "Yes, more than anything else. Can I, Mom?" "That's enough, Amanda. You're putting Tim in a terrible position. We haven't even discussed this yet." "Sorry, Tim, you must feel terrible." "Actually, I'm grateful to Amanda. I wouldn't have dared to ask you myself." "So to answer your question, Amanda, I would really like to be your new daddy if your mom will accept me." We both looked at Lindy, who looked like she was about to cry, but simply nodded her head and squeezed my hand. Yes, yes, and yes. Amanda rushed towards me at that moment, turning over her drink. I promised to be the best daughter in the world. So we spent the evening choosing rings. We found a small jewelry store on a side street that sold a variety of engagement rings. I saw Lindy looking longingly at some antique rings. When she asked to see a tray of rings that was reasonably priced, I also asked to see the tray she was looking at. She looked at me, and I told her to pick one and not look at the price. She chose a beautiful ring with a diamond surrounded by small rubies and tried it on. It fit perfectly. I told the salesman we were taking it, and Lindy gave me a passionate kiss. Amanda simply giggled. When we got home, Amanda insisted that we go show the ring to the nanny. Mrs. Whatsy Ross said she was happy for us all and asked when the wedding was. I explained that I was still in the process of getting a divorce, so I couldn't make plans yet. That night, after Amanda went to bed, we sat and cuddled on the couch. I said I would be back at work next Monday. I had already cleared everything with May, who said she was looking forward to my return. The next day I went to see Harry, and he said we had a lot to talk about. I arrived at his office at about 10 in the morning. He sat me down and told me we had a lot to talk about and started the video. Following his words, Harry installed surveillance equipment in all of Troy's rooms. He said he had hours of footage of Troy and Chris having sex in every possible position, but that wasn't what he wanted to talk about. As soon as the video started, I realized Chris wasn't there. It was his basement that he had turned into a man cave with a bar and alcohol. He was sitting with three friends, one of whom, I realized, was Carl Johnson. They were talking about Chris. "Carl, that's a really nice ass you got there. When can we get it?" Troy, "Soon." I gave her a little stuff every time we met. It just kept her horny enough that she wanted me to stick around. I can't believe what a stupid bitch she is. Timmy told her not to see me anymore, so what does she do? He calls me and asks me to come. What a bimbo. So I showed up, acted serious, and poured her a glass of wine with the substance in it. And by the time we finished the wine, she literally attacked me. I've had her every couple of days since then. She can't wait for it. She calls me all the time to come. Person 1. So what's the plan? Troy. Usual. I'll make her move in with me after the divorce. Once she sucks all the money out of him, it should be worth a couple $100,000, so I'll clear her out, or we could do what we did in Denver. She said she has $500,000 in life insurance, and I know he's insured for $300,000 with the company, so we could have a little accident like in Denver, and she'll get the money. I'll take everything from her, get her hooked on substances, and we can gang her up for a while, then sell her to Hector in Vegas for street work. So we'll all hit the jackpot. Ha, ha, literally. Harry stopped the video at this point. Tim, I know this is about your divorce, but we have crossed this line. We need to go to the police, even though this video cannot be used as evidence. I sat and thought for several minutes. What if I can get Troy to admit his plans on tape? Will it work? Yeah, that'll work. But how are you going to convince Troy to confess to murder and attempted murder? I have a plan. I will use his arrogance against himself and take revenge in the process. Just leave it to me. What I need you to do is... And I gave him a list of instructions. My next call was to Sam to ask him to prepare the site for the showdown next Friday, and he would receive the rest of the instructions later. I then called May and asked if she would mind if I returned to work on Monday. She said that was okay and asked if I wanted Troy and Carl fired before then. I asked her not to do this since I had a plan for them. Then I told her about their plans for Chris. She was shocked and very angry and asked what I was going to do. I said everything would become clear on Monday. I came to work early on Monday to get everything ready. I installed a sound-activated recorder under my desk and hid a micro camera with a motion detector on a bookshelf, then proceeded to tackle some of the backlog of work. I heard the office start to fill up and walked outside. My secretary Tina was just turning on her computer when she saw me coming out of my office. "Oh, Mr. Betters West, it's so great to see you in such good shape. Are you back for good? You look good too, and yes, I'm back for good." At that moment, I saw Troy heading towards the coffee machine with Carl and their friends. Now was my chance. I walked up to Troy, who grinned mockingly. "Hello, Timmy, how is your wife?" This caused giggles from those around him. "I don't know, she's with someone who steals wives from men in the hospital." "Oh yes, you know this, since you are that same scoundrel." Those around him held their breath, and Troy was about to rush at me, but Carl held him back, saying, "Not here, there are witnesses. We'll deal with it later." I looked at Troy and laughed. "They say your name is Bear. If so, then that makes me a terrier, because I'm going to tease you every chance I get until you stop hiding behind your friends." "So, Troy, are you ready for one-on-one, or are you a coward?" "I'm going to kill you, you little bastard." "Cheap words. Is that all you have? You're just a bag of wind. Look, how about we settle this in the ring, just you and me? You can even bring a few of your friends for support. And to make this more interesting, let's make a small bet. Anytime, anywhere, set a time. And what's the bet? Let me guess, if you win, you get your wife back." "Hell no, I don't want her back. She's spoiled. I wouldn't even touch her with yours, let alone mine." "No, if I win, I take your car and your house and everything in it, plus $20,000. If you win, you get my truck, an SLK Merc, 20,000, and that's..." I took out the recording device. Troy said, "What the hell is this supposed to be? Come to my office and we'll talk about it. You too, Carl, it concerns both of you. Something about Denver, Vegas, and Hector." Both turned pale and nodded. I went to my office, and they followed me like two lost sheep. When we entered the office, I sat down, and they had to stand because I had removed all the chairs. I turned on the recording for them and saw them become even paler. "Okay, guys, you know what it is?" "Well, what is it?" "Yes," they answered in unison. "So let's be clear. You find the right woman, gain her trust, slip her something, abuse her. Then you convince her to divorce her husband and give you all the money. Then you increase the dose of the substance, making her addicted so that you and your friends can collectively have sex with her. When you've had enough of it, you sell it to a Vegas pimp named Hector, who puts it on the street. So that's what you do. You know this is true, so what are you going to do about it? One more thing. If a man is worth more dead than alive, you're causing a minor accident. The insurance pays out, and you do the same to the woman. And that's what you have in mind for me and Christina, right?" "Yes, but now that you have found out everything, how much will your silence cost us?" "Well, if you meet me in the ring as suggested and win, this entry will be given to you along with the rest of the bet. Do we have an agreement?" "Hell yes, and I'll kill you in that ring, you stupid bastard, and I'll still have your wife and sell her." "Oh, by the way, Troy, just to satisfy my curiosity, what did you do with that guy in Denver?" "He fell off a bridge while walking his dog." But you were destined to have an accident, and it may still happen. Now that we've all agreed, you can go back to work. Go ahead, leave. I put away the recording devices and relayed the information to Harry. Then I opened my briefcase and took out the flyers that I had made earlier, inviting everyone to the fight and indicating the address. I called George, my lawyer, to draw up the terms of our bet. On the night of the fight, my lawyer and Troy's lawyer had to get our consent signatures, and each had to take the other client's property papers and a check for $20,000 made out to his opponent. Friday arrived, and I waited for Troy to come out of the locker room. I was already in the ring, sitting in my corner in a robe with a hood. Troy came out wearing a similar robe, raising his arms as if he was already a winner. He climbed into the ring, took a couple of fancy steps like Ollie, and threw a few punches into the air. He tossed his robe off to Chris, who caught it with a big smile. I felt a twinge of pain, but it was short-lived. I stood up and threw off my robe to Lindy, who insisted on coming to the fight. I saw Chris flinch, and an expression of pure hatred flash across her face. We stood opposite each other, a bear and a terrier. I was wearing tight knee-length lycra shorts with wrestling boots and boxing gloves. Troy wore traditional boxing shorts and boots, as well as wrestling gloves. I cut my hair in a military style, a 4 on top and a 2 on the sides. Combined with my wicked scar, people told me I looked like a pirate. Now that my robe was off, my new defined muscles were clearly visible and discussed by my work colleagues. Even Chris was sizing me up, and some of Troy's supporters looked at each other nervously, wondering if they had backed the horse. The judge climbed into the ring. There will be no rounds. The fight continues until one of the fighters can continue. The fight will only be stopped if one of the opponents loses consciousness. There are only 2 rules: no biting and no eye scratching. Everything else is permitted. He called us to the center of the ring and checked our gloves. Go back to your corners and come out to fight as soon as the bell rings. Ding ding, and we moved towards each other, walked around in a circle once, and Troy tried to quickly hit, which I easily dodged. I smiled at him and asked, "Is that all you have?" It worked. I made him angry. He made a massive round kick. If it had hit, it would have knocked me out. I was ready and dodged as he walked by. I stood up and pushed his elbow, increasing his momentum and knocking him off balance. Then I simply tripped his legs, and he fell heavily on his side. I walked to the other side of the ring, and in my best Bugs Bunny voice asked, "The big bad bear fell. Oh, what a shame." The Troy crowd either froze or muttered under their breath. Troy stood up. I saw him seething with rage. This was what I needed. He lost all concept of boxing when he yelled, "I'm going to kill you, you little brute," and rushed towards me with his arms outstretched to catch me in a bear hug. I stood still, raised my hands above my head so that they would not be captured. His arms wrapped around me, and he lifted me off the ground, spewing drool, shouting solemnly, "Now you will die." I closed my hands and hit his ears with my palms. He let me go and retreated, holding his ears. I walked up and punched him several times. He fell to his knees, still clutching his head. I lowered him to the floor and put my foot on his back. I then twisted his wrist and asked, "Are you done? Are you admitting defeat?" "You won, that's enough," he finally whispered. "I have one last question left. Who's the alpha male now, moron?" "You, for God's sake, you." I let him go and looked back at Chris to see her broken down, sitting in her chair, crying. My side of the ring celebrated wildly as Lindy smiled at me and gave me a thumbs up. I left the ring and approached 2 men in dark suits. "He is yours, gentlemen." They both laughed, and one said, "Yeah, we'll get him out of the hospital in a week or 2. Good job." Troy was unable to move and had to be taken to the hospital on a stretcher. Carl tried to sneak away, but was intercepted by several deputies who handcuffed him and led him away. My next stop was my lawyer, who witnessed the whole thing and was busy getting our money paid. Troy's lawyer didn't seem too upset as he handed over the title deeds to Troy's car and house, including all the contents. My lawyer gave me the keys to both, and I gave the house keys to the locksmith I hired to change the locks. Sam walked up to me, shaking my hand. "I've never seen anything better. David defeated Goliath in front of all his friends. You made him look like a complete fool. People will talk about this for years. I can even sell the video." Lindy then came over to congratulate me with a hug and kiss. May came over and I introduced Lindy to her, saying, "This is my future wife." May said we should come to her place for dinner soon and left. People gradually dispersed, patting me on the back. Even some of Troy's supporters apologized for my worries. The next day, I received a message from Chris asking me to meet at our old house. I replied that I would come, but I would bring Lindy with me. We arrived at the appointed time and went inside. The conversation went like this. Chris sat on a chair at the dining table and looked terrible. "I called you here to apologize for my behavior and explain why I did it. No explanation is needed, you were wrong, and now you're paying for it. Not only that, but when you filed for divorce and I showed it to Troy, he said he would marry me after our divorce, but now that he's arrested, I have no place to live. I can't afford this house anymore, I only kept it to remind me of you, but you moved on. Before you continue, I think you should listen to this. This was recorded shortly after you received the divorce papers. I played a recording of Troy and his friends discussing her future. When the recording ended, she rushed into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and before we could stop her, she cut her wrist. I took the knife and wrapped the towel tightly around her wrist. Lindy called an ambulance, and we held a hysterical Chris until the ambulance arrived. I went with her and Lindy followed. When we arrived, I insisted that she be given a private room and provided my insurance information to the reception nurse. When they brought her to the ward after the operation, she was still unconscious, and the doctor asked if I was her husband. I explained that we were getting a divorce, and he said they wanted to keep her under supervision. I called Chris's mother and explained what happened. She said she would be on the next flight and would see me soon. I stayed with Chris until her mother arrived and told her everything that happened. She said Chris was a stupid girl but didn't deserve to die. I agreed and said that I would pay all her medical bills. She thanked me and I left. I had been back at work for a couple of weeks when Chris's mother called to say that Chris had attempted suicide for the third time by overdosing on sleeping pills. She accumulated them in the hospital, but the nurse caught her. She was transferred to a psychiatric hospital near her mother's home, where she will undergo therapy. I thanked her for the information and ended the conversation. Troy was convicted of murder, conspiracy to murder, human trafficking, administering a substance without consent, and fraud. He received 3 life sentences, which will run consecutively. He will die in prison. Carl received the same sentences. Their 3 friends were each sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy to murder. Hector was sentenced to 20 years for human trafficking and organized crime. Chris attempted suicide a 3rd time and was admitted to a mental health clinic, where she suffered a nervous breakdown and ended up in a state mental institution. Lindy and I have moved into a 4-bedroom house and are expecting our 2nd child in 5 months. Life was finally good. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.